The chilling DNA secret that tore this family apart. Mike paced back and forth in the living room, clutching the DNA results that had just shattered his world. He had always been a man of certainty, loyal to his family and principles. But now, his confidence in everything had come crashing down. "Mike, stop pacing." Mary's voice was weak, almost like she couldn't muster the strength to face the truth, staring them in the face. "You're scaring me." "How do you expect me to stop?" Mike growled, tossing the paper onto the coffee table. "Andrew is not our son." The words hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. It wasn't just the idea that Andrew wasn't biologically theirs. It was everything Andrew represented. The rebellious child, the black sheep, always seemed at odds with everything they stood for. And now this? Mary was pale. "But Mike, I never cheated on you. I never—" "I know, Mary," Mike interrupted, rubbing his temples in frustration. "I know you didn't. But that doesn't change the fact that the DNA test is clear. Andrew isn't ours." A silence settled between them, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm. "And we need to figure out what the hell happened at that hospital," Mike said quietly. His mind was already spinning. Who was their real son? Where was he? And what would happen when Andrew found out the truth? Chapter 1. The Beginning of a Dream. Mike and Mary Daniels were the kind of couple that others would watch in awe, wondering how two individuals could be so in sync. They built a business empire from humble beginnings, starting with a small real estate company. Mike was sharp, a negotiator with a charm that could sell anything. Mary had a quiet strength, balancing business with kindness, always looking after the people around them. When they had their first child, Andrew, it was like the final piece of their perfect puzzle. Mike would joke with friends, "I'm raising my future CEO," while bouncing baby Andrew on his knee. But as Andrew grew, he wasn't quite the golden child everyone expected. There were little hints, tantrums, rebellious streaks, anger outbursts at age 5 over something as simple as not getting the red balloon. Still, Mike and Mary shrugged it off, saying, "Boys will be boys." Then came Amelina, a delight from the beginning, sweet, clever, and well-behaved, the model child. It became clear quickly that she was everything her parents could ever want. However, as she excelled, Andrew's shortcomings became more apparent: school suspensions and the constant drama. By the time Andrew was 18, he was a regular at rehab, and Amelina was preparing for a prestigious university. "Our kids, they can't all turn out the same," Mike would say to Mary. But even he knew something felt off about Andrew. They just never could put a finger on it. Little did they know, Andrew was already plotting, feeling increasingly like a stranger in his own family. He couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong, and it fueled a dark resentment toward his parents and the golden child, Amelina. Chapter 2. The perfect plan unravels. Mike and Mary had always trusted Aaron, their loyal business manager. He had been with them since the early days when they could barely pay employees. Aaron wasn't just a manager, he was practically family. He knew their business better than anyone, maybe even Mike himself. Aaron handled everything, freeing Mike and Mary to live their glamorous, successful life. As Mike and Mary grew older, they began thinking about the future. Who would run the empire when they were gone? They had always hoped Andrew would step up, but his constant screw-ups made that impossible. So, they leaned more on Ameliana. After all, she was intelligent and responsible and had always shown interest in the business. Aaron, of course, supported their decision, but Andrew, he hated it. He felt like an outsider, always being compared to his perfect sister. His resentment grew darker, and when he discovered the truth, when he found that old letter hidden in his mother's office revealing he wasn't Mike and Mary's biological son, something snapped inside him. "You've got to be kidding me," Andrew muttered, reading the DNA results. He wasn't even related to them. Andrew's mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, and none were good. They lied to me. They never really loved me. Well, guess what? If I'm not family, I've got nothing to lose. That's when the idea started to form. Half of the estate would be his if Mike and Mary were gone. Sure, Amelina was technically perfect in every way, but Andrew was still their son, at least legally. And that's all that mattered in the end, right? A will is a will. Andrew planned it meticulously down to the last detail. He tampered with the brakes on their car, ensuring they wouldn't work the next time his parents drove up to the mountains. Accidents happen, he thought to himself with a twisted grin, and this one is going to work out in my favor. Thanks for watching up to this point. Please subscribe. Chapter 3. Suspicion arises. The news of Mike and Mary's tragic car accident shattered everyone. To the world, it was just a sad, horrible coincidence, but Amelina couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Her parents were always so careful. How could their brakes suddenly fail? The thought gnawed at her, even as she stood at their funeral, tears streaming down her face. Andrew, meanwhile, played the role of the grieving son perfectly. He stood there, holding a tissue, dabbing at his eyes, though anyone who looked closely would have noticed that he wasn't exactly crying. His mind was already on the estate. With Mike and Mary gone, the actual game was about to begin. But while Andrew plotted his next move, Detective Samuel Reeds, an old family friend of Mike's, began digging deeper into the accident. Something wasn't adding up, and Reeds was a man who trusted his instincts. "You don't just lose brakes like that out of nowhere," he muttered, scribbling down notes from the crash site. While Andrew cozied up to lawyers to secure his share of the estate, Detective Reeds followed every lead, every subtle clue, even checking the wreckage of the car. "What do you think?" asked his assistant as they crouched near the twisted remains of Mike's car. "I think someone wanted this car to fail," Reeds said grimly. "And I think I know who." Chapter 4. Courtroom Drama. The courtroom was packed. The estate was worth millions, and now it was all up for grabs. Andrew sat confidently at his table, his lawyer spouting off about how the will was clear. Half of everything was Andrew's, and no one could dispute that. Amelina, sitting across the room, felt her heart pounding. She wasn't just fighting for her parents' legacy, she was fighting for justice. She couldn't prove it, but she knew Andrew had something to do with their deaths. There was just something about his smugness, his coldness. It didn't add up. The battle between the siblings grew intense, lawyers arguing back and forth, each trying to discredit the other. Amelina's lawyer highlighted Andrew's drug history, his rehab stints, and his irresponsible behavior. But Andrew's lawyer countered that none of that mattered. Legally, Andrew was Mike and Mary's son, and the will left him half the estate. It seemed Andrew would win, but as the judge was about to make his ruling, Detective Reeds burst into the room, holding a thick folder of evidence. The room fell silent. "Your Honor," Reed said, stepping forward, "I have reason to believe this was no accident. Mike and Mary Daniels were murdered, and I have evidence to prove it." Andrew's face paled. He tried to compose himself, but the beads of sweat on his brow told the real story. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous!" Andrew's lawyer sputtered, but Reed's was relentless. He laid out the case step by step, the tampered brakes, the inconsistencies in Andrew's alibi, and the motive, greed. Chapter 5. The Final Blow. Just when everyone thought the revelations couldn't get any worse, the private investigator Amelina had hired dropped a bombshell of his own. As part of his investigation into Andrew, he had uncovered hospital records from the day Andrew was born. The babies had been switched. Andrew wasn't Mike and Mary's son, but neither was this other child. The real twist? Aaron, the trusted business manager, who had practically been part of the family for years, was Mike and Mary's biological son. He had been raised by Mike and Mary as if he was family, although he was, after the death of his parents. His business acumen had seen him rise from an intern to an estate manager. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Emelina's mouth fell open. Andrew sat in stunned silence, his world crashing down around him. Not only had he murdered the only people who ever tried to love him, but he wasn't even entitled to the estate. Ultimately, the court ruled in favor of Amelina and Aaron, splitting the estate between them. Andrew, meanwhile, was arrested for the murder of Mike and Mary, his schemes having backfired spectacularly. Chapter 6. Aftermath. Amelina and Aaron stood outside the courthouse, looking up at the sky, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened. They had lost their parents, but in the end, they had gained each other, real family. As for Andrew, he was left to rot in a prison cell, his bitterness and hatred his only company. He had spent his entire life feeling like an outsider, and in the end, he had destroyed the only people who ever tried to make him feel like he belonged. Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe. Cheers and have a good one.